80 years ago, in 1940, the British people faced the greatest threat to their way of life ever, a war that would change the nation. In 1940, victory was uncertain, but the nation pulled together in an extraordinary display of national resolve. As Winston Churchill said, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall never surrender."
This was Britain in its darkest hour. The people knew they were in for the worst the Nazi mind could invent, yet they didn't panic or run away. They patrolled and waited. They drilled and waited. They worked and waited. Waited for the terror they knew was coming. Then it came. That's the sound that became part of the life of every man, woman, and child in Britain.
The wail of the air raid siren is for most British people of all ages the sound of World War II. For those who lived through the war, it was the sound of terror as the Luftwaffe pounded British towns and cities to ruins in the Blitz. On this day, 75 years ago, the war in Europe ended. The bombers stopped coming, and the long process of rebuilding a shattered and weary nation began. The uniforms were put away. The air raid shelters filled in, the bomb sites rebuilt, and the infrastructure of war dismantled and scrapped. But incredible though it may seem, 75 years after VE Day, part of Britain's World War II civil defence infrastructure remains in place and still used today in 2020. And it's perhaps its most evocative, the air raid sirens. During World War II, every city, town and village in Britain with a population over 3,000 people was equipped with electrically powered air raid sirens. When an enemy raid was detected on radar or by ground observers, the red warning would be sounded, the famous rising and falling tone, to indicate that people should immediately head for air raid shelters. When the raid was over or the threat had passed, the all clear would be sounded, a long, unwavering tone. The sirens were enormously powerful and were made by several companies and mounted on tall telegraph poles or atop high buildings. The sirens are an electromechanical device consisting of a pair of fans known as rotors, rotating either side of a powerful electric motor. The sound is produced by the rotors chopping the airflow sucked into the ends of the siren as it passes through the equally spaced holes in the rotor housing. When the Second World War ended 75 years ago, the sirens remained in place and fully functional as the new threat quickly emerged in the years that followed: atomic war. All through the Cold War from 1945 to 1991, the old World War II air raid sirens remained in place, tested often. In the event of the missiles flying, Britons would get about 4 minutes warning to seek shelter before being incinerated by Soviet atomic bombs. The wailing air raid sirens would have been the last thing most Britons would have heard before Armageddon. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the British government immediately set about drastically reducing the size of the armed forces and almost completely dismantling civil defence organisations and infrastructure. The 7,000 sirens were decommissioned in 1992, but many remained in place. In fact, many of these old World War II sirens continue to serve a useful purpose decades and decades after the Blitz. And incredibly, in 2020, several hundred, mostly World War II era sirens remain in place and surprisingly active. One of the major uses of Blitz-era sirens today is flood warning. Serious flooding has plagued parts of Britain for years, and the sirens remain a very effective way to warn people that they should evacuate their homes and businesses. Unlike relying on mobile phone warning text messages, which do not reach everyone as many older people don't use such devices, the wail of the World War II siren is unmistakable. Those councils, such as Lincolnshire County Council, who decommissioned all their 46 sirens in place of mobile phone alerts in 2011, presumably to save the costs of actually maintaining the sirens, will probably regret this decision in the future. On the island of Guernsey in the Channel Islands in 2010, the government also decided to retire all of its 13 public warning sirens, even though the public opposed the move, as the sirens were the only way to warn everyone quickly of an emergency. There was even a protest march against the decision and a petition, but the sirens went anyway, replaced by the aforementioned text messaging service. Just one siren was kept for ceremonial purposes. However, some councils have managed to find the money to keep the sirens operational, and they have performed sterling service in repeated floods. They remain in service today, saving lives. Many companies have also retained or obtained World War II sirens to alert local residents to emergencies, primarily chemical plants, oil refineries, and nuclear power stations. Air raid sirens have been retained and regularly tested at Britain's 3 main naval bases at Portsmouth, Devonport and Clyde to warn locals in case of an accident involving one of Britain's nuclear-powered or nuclear-armed submarines. Sirens are also used to warn people of escaped lunatics from secure hospitals, such as at Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire until quite recently, a high-security psychiatric facility housing some of Britain's most dangerous criminals. But at Broadmoor, their system of 13 World War II sirens, installed in 1952 to warn local villagers of a patient escaping, were removed in 2018 in favour of escape alerts via Twitter. An interesting decision. Local residents objected to the decommissioning, as there are 16 primary schools within the radius of the sirens, but to no avail. However, some of the high-security psychiatric facilities have maintained their sirens, and they're still operational in villages surrounding these facilities. And finally, though over 80 years old in most cases, quite a few decommissioned air raid sirens remain abandoned and forgotten atop poles and buildings across Britain, a poignant reminder of the Blitz and the later V-Weapons campaign. Silent memorials to a terrible conflict that ended 75 years ago today.
While London burned above them, the people of the city held on, chin up and thumbs up. They knew this was the people's war, and they were the people. And a people that couldn't be panicked, couldn't be beaten. In the months to come, the British were to suffer many such bombings and burnings. But a nation that calls on cold courage when hot courage runs thin may die, but it can't be defeated.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share. You can also visit my new audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. And you can support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.